Marker is anything that precedes a moment to the dog. Specifically, it can be a reward event, it can be a negative event, or it can be a preemptive mark to an action, a sound, a word, a tap on the side of the head, a squeeze on the ear. It's anything that the dog registers prior to an event happening. I kind of equate the whole, like, we don't want to go out in the field with a bag of food. Yes, we don't want to go out in the field with whatever. But when we do that, you only have that negative marker, that one level of communication. Not only are you not going out with any reinforcement, you're also going out with zero communication other than negativity. Your dog's only going to know what they're doing wrong, and then they're just going to be expected to figure out how to do it right. And for markers to be clear and for markers to be powerful, when the dog does understand them perfectly, at that point, you don't need the food. You don't need the tugs. You don't need the extra stuff that you think you got to take out there. With your clarity of communication, with the markers, with all of your e-collar work, at the end of the day, the goal is making the behavior itself the reward. The act of doing with heart and soul is the reward, right?
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of GDIY. I'm joined with Jared Warren of Southern State Canine this week. Jared, how we doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm living the dream as always. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on and talk to something that, subject-wise, I think it's a very underutilized subject within the gun dog space, and I'm excited to kind of shed some light on it. The use of markers, what markers are, how they can be applied. I think that it kind of has a bad rep in the world for whatever reason. You hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm not going to go train my dog with a fanny pack or treats or something like that. And then when you start bringing up markers, they inevitably automatically picture like the obedience trainer at PetSmart or Petco or something. And I think that it doesn't really get the attention that it deserves. And I think shedding some light on it, it will actually make a lot of people's lives a little bit more enjoyable and the training a little bit more fun, honestly, with their dogs.
Yeah. And really, that, from my novice outlook into the gun dog world, and I'll preface this entire conversation with the fact that, like, I grew up with hunting dogs. I've hunted with dogs. I've done all that. I would not consider myself a, a gun dog guy. I would just consider myself a dog guy. I have a lot of knowledge. I studied under, a lot of great people, learned a lot of lessons. So hopefully I'll be able to change some opinions. But I mean, the old kind of, I don't want to say caveman because caveman is the wrong word. It's outdated styles of training that, okay, we train the dog in a very controlled setting. We do all the stuff correctly in a controlled setting. And then maybe we do a little bit of proofing. Maybe we, get the dog out and generalize a little bit. But why wouldn't you want to take that same level of communication out to the field where you're expecting the dog to do exactly what you want it to do? Which, the marker is just that. It's a level of communication that's clear to your dog as to what you're asking, whether or not they did the right thing, whether or not to keep doing the right thing. And a marker is really at its core a multi-use tool. So I think when, the dudes, I've never heard it put like that, but guys talk about it like, oh, taking a fanny pack out to the field and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That almost kind of like you're less of a handler if you do it. I don't even know how that makes sense to anybody. How are you less of a handler? How are you less of a trainer or anything if you're going to take high level communication out into the realm that your dog is supposed to work? It kind of just blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it just comes from, I think, a lot of people that you don't really very often hear people say that it doesn't work. You more or less hear people say it's unnecessary. Like it hasn't been needed for decades upon decades with the right method, so on and so forth. And let's face it, you can train a dog without treat training, clicker training, markers, whatever. You can.
Yeah.
I would argue that you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing exponentially more reps at the cost of potentially stressing out your dog, making them a little more anxious without at least considering using these. Because what you just described is it is a communication tool. And the reason why I like them so much, and this is something that, for years I had more of a negative marker saying, wrong, stop that thing, but I never really
Mhm.
utilized them as efficiently as I should. And once I did, it's like, oh, I'm not only telling the dog what I don't like, I'm also telling the dog what I do like, and by extension, I'm also telling them, like, yes, keep doing it. And so
Mhm.
it seems like by implementing the markers, you're getting a lot more ground covered a lot more efficiently, which means less reps, which means less frustration, which means less confusion. You're adding clarity. Like, I don't really understand the negative outlook on this stuff. Now, I mean, I agree. I don't want to be out in the field with a pocket full of kibble or hot dogs or whatever
Oh yeah,
long
nobody
term.
does.
But that's why it's important to have these conversations right here to educate, because the goal of this is to not always need food. It's just, and sometimes it's not even
Yeah,
food that's the reward. It's just one of the rewards. So I guess let's start with better defining what a marker actually is.
yeah,
So let's just start there with the actual language and say, define exactly what it is for us.
yeah, absolutely. So a marker is, simply put, anything that precedes a moment to the dog, right? Specifically, it can be a reward event, it can be a negative event, or it can be a preemptive mark to an action, right? And I kind of equate the whole, like, you know, yes, we don't want to go out in the field with a bag of food. Yes, we don't want to go out in the field with, whatever. But when we do that and we don't have, like you said, you only have that negative marker, that one level of communication where the dog only knows the marker in one context, right? So not only are you not going out with any reinforcement, you're also going out with zero communication other than negativity, right? Your dog's only going to know what they're doing wrong. And then they're just going to be expected to figure out how to do it right. Right. So, and again, a marker's a word, sound, action that precedes any event to the dog that's markable, right? Or marked. And at its core, that's all it is. It can be a sound, it can be uh, a word, it can be, a tap on the side of the head, it can be a squeeze on the ear, whatever it is. Um, it's anything that the dog registers prior to an event happening, right? Um, and for markers to be clear and for markers to be powerful, when the dog does understand them perfectly, um, at that point, you don't need the food. You don't need the tugs. You don't need the extra stuff that you think you got to take out there. Because in the system that I guess study heavily, NEPOPO, right? Trademarked. The goal of NEPOPO, with your clarity of communication, with the markers, with all of your e-collar work, everything, at the end of the day, what's the goal is making the behavior itself the reward. The act of doing with heart and soul is the reward, right? We achieve that through proper foundational training, proper installation of markers, proper installation of corrections or punishments, proper installation of reward, and then generalizing, proofing, and then application, right? And then we advance those tools, or we advance those skills with our e-collars, which we can create new markers with, and with our, other tools that we use in training. Um, and that'll actually throw a lot of people for a loop that aren't too savvy on it. Is like, your e-collar device can be a marker. So you don't have to speak. You don't have to do anything. You can talk to the dog non-verbally in their primary method of communication through the collar, and then mark everything you want to mark or correct everything you want to correct without saying a word. Um, Sorry, that was a tangent.
No,
Got
man,
lost on that one.
you're good, because there's. I'm going to try and stay on a path here the best we can, because on a
Yeah.
topic such as this, it's hard not to talk about markers without talking about rewards, which that's going to come. But it's very hard to stay linear on this because the mark itself is I think it's important to note that like just because you mark does not mean that like immediately you get a reward. Like you can mark and then the
Exactly.
anticipation, there's a time lapse between the mark of you saying good or bad and then the reward or what have you. And so by doing that consistently enough and then you start overlaying your e-collar, it sounds crazy to a lot of people, but you can actually make the dog have I don't want to use the word positive or negative in this context, but a very noticeable upcharge or just a good response to the e-collar because they know through classical conditioning how many reps and consistency that, oh, the e-collar comes on, that means I'm about to get paid because I'm about to do something cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's why the markers are so powerful is by conditioning it and charging it. I think a lot of people get caught up to where they think that they're always going to be in the field charging the clicker to where they're just standing out on a place board, just click, kibble, click, kibble, click, kibble.
Yeah.
And they don't recognize the application that you can actually utilize in gun dog specific training that will make their lives a little bit more efficient, if you will. And so you define marker. It can be anything from a sound. It can be essentially body language. It can be touch. It can be a million different things. Let's talk about the type of markers. There's different types of, staying in behavior, saying keep going, a terminal. Let's just kind of break
Yeah.
down which ones they are, and then I want to get into how we start using them in what scenarios and try and come up with some. I do want to talk about some real applicable training scenarios so that people start to realize in real time that like you just add this little layer to what you're already doing and you would be shocked at the benefits of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the types of markers really, um, when you break it down, if you're looking at markers that everybody should, would, will have, are your reward event marker, your terminal marker, your indirect marker, right? So indirect to reward, um, and a negative marker. Maybe I said that one twice. Um, and this is why, like you said, talking about markers, it brings up so many other things because markers are really like when you get into your foundations of training, when you're just beginning to train the dog and you are charging marker through classical conditioning and known behavior, um, which for anybody that's watching this that doesn't understand or doesn't know wholly what a marker is, or what classical conditioning is, really is pairing a new behavior with a known understood stimulus, right? So in charging, right, with, let's keep it simple with pets, right? Click, food, click, food, click, food, click, food. And we sit there and we load that, right? And like you said earlier, your markers are correct when they're charged with dynamite. You see a physiological response in the dog whenever that word is said, right? So for people that don't understand that, like that's exactly what that is. Now, your reward event marker is something that specifically signals to the dog, hey, you've hit the mark. Now your reward is coming, right? And the beauty of that is once the marker is understood, you can take all the time in the world, right? You can take all the time in the world from mark to payment to get it to the dog because the dog understands at that point, through Pavlovian conditioning, just like, bell, dog salivate, food comes. At some point, the bell would ring. The dogs would sit there and salivate for an hour because they know food is coming at some point, right? So that's the beauty of that reward marker. Your negative marker, again, another simple one, simply stating to the dog, hey, you've missed the mark, try again, right? And then, you have your duration marker, your keep going marker. Hey, I like what you're doing. Keep doing it. I'm not necessarily going to pay you for it yet. An indirect marker to go receive a reward away from me. And what that looks like in sport training for people that, aren't in the sport dog world. You'll see if you watch people train all the time, there'll be like a tug on the ground and the dog has to heel with the handler, tight heads up heel. And when the dog gets marked, the dog goes away from the handler, comes out of behavior to receive reward, then may have to leave reward to fly back into behavior, right? And that's a super powerful method of marking, is making the dog break out of behavior to receive reward and um, possess for a little bit and have that dopaminergic release, and then boom, hey, right back into behavior, figure it out again, right? Because
Well,
these wheels are always turning.
and we're going to get to that. I want to elaborate because I do want to come back and get to the terminal marker on this. But for a real time example, I'm curious if we're talking about bird dogs in the field and we're talking about steadiness. Dog goes on point, bird gets up. We're requiring the behavior of steadiness, stay in one spot, stay still. We shoot the bird, then we reward. They get to go get the bird. They're out of the standing behavior. They get the reward of getting the bird, but then they have to come back and immediately come into heel or sit to hand back off the bird. Wouldn't that be the same exact
Exactly.
kind of situation?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And really that's up to, and this is again, it's another nuance because you can't train every dog the same. Not every other dog's the same. It's really like what your dog identifies as the reward. The reward may be coming back into heel with the handler
Yeah.
because they value that proximity, they value that interaction because pack very much matters. Um, but the reward for some dogs is simply going, chasing, hunting, and finding the bird, which arguably I would say is the reward for most dogs because it's genetically ingrained in them. Um, but yeah, that's another version of that indirect reward system.
And you could, by extension, I would say that really, if you're consistent enough to where you're only shooting properly handled birds, the dogs stayed, they did their job of us requiring them to stay steady until we shoot. The gunfire could be the marker for that behavior,
Yeah,
right? Now, if you're
and yes,
inconsistent and you shoot when the dog breaks and it's out of behavior, and so your marker starts losing value because of your inconsistency. But in theory, if you're consistent enough and timely enough, that's why dogs can start just getting amped up by the gunfire in the field. And it's just, all of a sudden you can have steadiness in your dog without gunfire. You add gunfire in, and all of a sudden they're this dog just wants to break and nuke that bird, right? But that's
yeah,
what we're talking about. We can then condition that marker to actually keep the dog in behavior if used correctly.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Your your all of your markers should be equally important, and they should be adhered to in equal importance to your dog. Right, your terminal marker, your reward marker should be as important as your negative marker. Your hey, go get it or indirect marker should be as important as come get it, right? And it's funny that you talked about the gunshot being the marker. It's like that's what a lot of guys don't understand is like they're inadvertently marking things without having a marker system,
Right.
right? Like all of a sudden maybe at least in your world, I don't know if it would go this way, but guys go on a couple hunts with a younger the dog is always paying attention. There's no animal on the face of this earth that pays attention to a human being or their actions like a dog. um, but that young dog is on those hunts and he's paying attention to everything because success has to be achieved. And once he gets it, he never wants to lose that feeling or that emotion ever again. Right. So as he's paying attention, as he's going through the hunt, he's realizing, yeah, safety coming off, the audible click of the safety coming off, the flapping of the birds, the wind moving the grass, right? Maybe the certain sound of whatever fowl you're hunting makes in proximity to the dog. He's taking all of this in all at once. And in my world, where I came from, and a lot of my guys come from, Randall, we watch our dogs intently because it's life or death that's on the line. And we started noticing there's this thing we do called a squirter chase, where we pretty much go apprehend somebody that's fleeing away from this target that we're on. What we started noticing was the dogs would understand when that squirter chase team met up, and then we started moving, right? They would understand that. And then they would understand when we got to where we thought this person was, we would always put up a drone because we're always going to try and outsmart the bad guys, right? But that drone makes a very audible vroom, and it takes off, right? Well, when the drone started taking off, like the guy was ID'd very quickly, and then the dog was cut. Go bite the bad guy. Reward, that event is now coming based off of the preceding notion of the audible sound of the drone going up, right? Dog knows it's close, it's coming. So we see a rise in state of arousal. Some of the dogs get verbal. Some of the dogs, start lunging to go out. The drone became a marker, right? The drone preceded a reward event. And it was crazy for us because we're like, why are these dogs doing this? We've done this 100 times. And we started incorporating the drone, and they picked up on it like that. They're like, drone tells me where the bad guy is.
Drone means good things are about to happen.
Yeah, drone
I get to
means
tear somebody up.
Exactly. And like, it's, if you think your dogs aren't paying attention and you don't train in a marker system or you don't have any markers, you got them.
Right.
100% you got them.
Well, and it goes back to that's why the routine and the sequence matter so much, and consistency matters to these dogs. They're picking up whether you're trying to teach them or not. I think I did an episode with Nate Zarnota a number of weeks ago, and he referenced a Pat Nolan quote of, "It doesn't matter what you intended or tried to teach the dog. It matters what you taught the dog." That's what really matters, and that's why it's so important to recognize whether you're intentionally using these markers or not. You're still doing it, especially if you're a creature of habit and routine and you are consistent. You're just not using it to your benefit. And so before we carry on, I do want to circle back and define the terminal marker, because that's the one that we didn't touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. So terminal marker is a marker that precedes the end of any behavior chain. Right. So if my dog is healing, right, and I don't necessarily want to release him to a reward that's indirect away from me, right, I may say, done. That behavior is now done. Right. You're free to be about. You're free to end this behavior. You're free to come out of it, but it's not reward time yet. Right. And really, this will confuse a lot of people, because I can already hear the question, well, is it a reward marker or a terminal marker? Well, yeah, it can be if that's how you want to train it. That's the beauty of dog training and markers. There's no one way to do it. There are 9 million ways to roam when it comes to dog training. It's all in how you want to build your dog and your system. What works for the dog in front of you is what's going to work. And Pat, really, like, the dude's a guru, a wizard of dog training. That quote rings true. It doesn't matter what you intend to teach the dog. It's what did you teach the dog, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter what's supposed to be done or what, this professional trainer says. That professional trainer doesn't have your dog in front of him, right? You have to train the dog in front of you. Your marker system has to work for the dog in front of you, right? And I think a lot of guys get hung up on that. Like, well, I got to do it like this. It's like, well, do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
Don't be afraid to steer away from the outline or step by step that somebody gave you. Now, if this is your first time and you truly don't know up from down, left from right, stay on track with that, because it gives you a path, it gives you a road. It also gives you the resource to where when you do reach out and ask for help, you can communicate to somebody that gave you the outline, or somebody that's trained in your method. They can help guide you a little bit better, to whereas if you just start making it up as you go along and you have zero education in any of this stuff, and you can't really actually verbalize what you're doing, you veering off course, you could end up in no man's land. And to your point, the pro trainer is like, they don't have your dog in front of them. They're just like, man, I don't know how to advise you from this. So I do believe that, especially starting out, when you don't even know what questions to ask, pick a method and stick with it. But also, don't be afraid as you gain experience, as it starts making more sense and you start being able to read your dog and then you get your second or third dog. Don't be afraid to deviate and kind of put your own flavor on this stuff to make it
Yeah,
more tailor made to your individual dog. You know, that's a pet peeve of mine. So many people say that, like, oh, every dog is different, every person is different, but then they'll say, pick a method and stick to it and then don't ever leave the method. And it's like, well, hold up. Like how can that one method apply to all dogs and all people if we acknowledge that they're all different? You know, that one
exactly.
kind of doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and like I had a platoon sergeant that told me this one time because this is a human analogy because I was a young team leader at the time and we were doing some room clearing exercises and he wanted us to do it one way and I was taught a very different way by the book. And I brought that to him. I was like, "Hey, Big Sarge, like I don't want to do it like this. It's not right. Like I don't think this is right." And he told me, he goes, "Warren, principles remain the same. Methodology evolves over time." Right. And that's kind of always stuck with me is like when you find a system and to lend a hand to you is like when you're new and you find a system and it's like stick to it, right? The principle of that system can remain the same. The principle of the training can remain the same. Your methodology, not trainer A, B, C, or D's, your methodology must change over time because your dog will also change over time. Your dog at 8 months isn't going to be the same dog at 2.5, 3 years. And you're not going to be the same handler or trainer in the same amount of time. So you have to evolve your system. It's ever changing. When you find that you're stale or you're kind of just going, you're using the same things, it's not really working, and like, or maybe the dog's beating it because he's quick on it now, you can actually start augmenting your system, maybe cutting some markers out that are unneeded, cutting some behavior chains out that aren't needed, right? If your methodology of training isn't evolving, you need to observe that a little bit and see how we can kind of optimize. So, but yes, I think it is a good rule of thumb. If you're new, find a system, train in it, follow its principles for a little bit until you find your own way. Once you find a way that works for you, go with that and then evolve it, figure it out, communicate with other trainers, communicate with other handlers that have different systems, that train differently than you. And then take what you like, discard what you don't, and then put it in yours.
Yeah.
That's all dog training is a game of thievery. Like,
Dude, I say it all the time. I'm after everybody's cheat codes. I've not been
exactly.
shy about telling everybody that is like, you know, go to all the seminars, man. Go watch somebody that you honestly don't even like how their dogs work because you don't know, even if it is learning something that you don't want to do, sometimes can be just as valuable as learning something you do want to do, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why, you know, that's really how I've been able to do this show for almost 5 years now and without getting bored. Is it's like, man, just take whatever information somebody has, and if it applies to you, cool. If it doesn't, you know, all right, we'll file it away. It's still in the back of your mind somewhere and you can pull it out if needed. But that is not to say that every decision, every new thing you try is worth keeping. Like you said, like
Exactly.
sometimes you can implement it like, it didn't go exactly the way I wanted. But
Yeah.
if you do what is preached by everybody, this is one of those common threads that spreads from trainer to trainer to trainer, is you go at the pace of the dog. If you go in small enough steps and you recognize what you tried did not work, you if you as long as you didn't go too hard too fast or too far, the dog is not going to be worse for wear to just back up and try it a new way, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
importance of the small steps, baby steps, if you will, is it prevents you from getting yourself into trouble, if that's fair to
Oh,
say.
yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that's 100% fair to say. And like, if I don't think I'd have enough hands to count on how many times I've started over with dogs, like a single dog. I may get this dog all the way through, part of my regular program or like, my retired dog, Sim. I've started that dude over, I don't know, 10 times. Like, okay, I've done everything wrong. Like, go back to square one. It's never bad to take a step back and like blocking the human desire to want to be like, okay, dog's got it, let's go, like, and hurry training along. Like,
Yeah.
training takes time, and time needs time. Like, whenever you start feeling like you're ready to progress to the next step, just go ahead and stay there for a little bit, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. No, man,
But
it's so true. Getting back to the markers specifically, I think, when we start talking about how and when to use them, I think, the let's first break down the concepts of free shaping versus luring, because I think especially when let's say that we're starting out with a puppy, or maybe you're hitting reset on your dog and you're going back to square one like we were just talking about. This is probably the easiest way to start implementing your marker to where the average person can noticeably see it making sense to the dog. And so, we can use whatever example you want. I personally like the placeboard example because it's a very cut, dry, on or off behavior. But can you speak to the difference between free shaping and luring, and how we're implementing the usage of markers in each of those systems?
yeah, absolutely. So preceding notion to all of that is like, your marker, your at least your reward marker needs to be charged prior to shaping anything or showing anything. You need to charge your marker, even if your marker is just a clicker, right? Sitting there and putting money in the bank. Click means food. Click means food. That classical conditioning thing that we already talked about. Um, but when you go into free shaping is pretty much, in layman's terms, letting the dog figure it out, letting them build their own idea of what the behavior is supposed to look like. And as humans, we already have an idea of what the behavior is supposed to look like. We already have an end goal. And then, you have to build a progression back to get there. But in free shaping, you get there a little bit quicker, because when you start marking the baby steps of how to get there and the dog starts figuring it out, like to the place board, right? I always start marking, even if the dog just looks in the general direction, right? I want to build value in whatever's over there. The dog's going to say, okay, well, every time I look over there, reward now comes, right? I then have to change my criteria and ask for more at some point, right? Based on the dog's behavior. So as the dog starts putting the pieces together, and I'm not physically showing the dog is inspired through free thought, believing that this behavior is its
Yeah.
own idea.
That's important to note. You're not cueing, you're not pointing, you're not talking, you're
No.
not leading them. You don't have a leash on them. You're just sitting there waiting for them to look at the place board or head in that direction.
Yep. And I don't even look at them. I don't even look in their general direction. Like, it's funny. I had this, she's like a little collie mix out there, but like, I was trying to free shape her to go and get up on this like pedestal. Um, she's good with a place cop, but she doesn't know about height change. And anyway, she's standing there, and I'm not looking at her. I'm like looking off over here, trying to watch her out of my peripherals, and she's just like staring at me like this. It's just it's ridiculous. But I don't even look at him, because the look, your gaze can be a gestural level of communication to the dog, right? If you don't think they're paying attention that much, they are. Um, but you're not doing anything. You're literally a stick in the mud or a stick in the seat, and you're letting the dog think and build their own idea. And that free shaping makes behavior really strong. Excuse me. For that simple reason is the dog believes that that behavior that you're building is its idea. They have created it. No one's shown them. They've produced their own reward. And that's why it makes that behavior so strong.
So it's essentially
That's
cutting
what,
the middleman out. It's like in this place board example, they are starting to think, oh, that place board isn't good because dad says it is. That place board is just
no.
good because it's good. It gives, every
Yeah.
time I look at it or go to it, I get paid, and it's not
Yeah.
because dad told me to.
Yeah. Every time I hop on this place board, it makes that monkey over there dig in the food bag and put food in my mouth. Right. Simply put, it's they believe it's their behavior. They believe that they've constructed it. Now, when we go into, showing behavior, luring, that's you telling the dog, hey, this is what we're doing, right? This is how we're going to build this mechanically. I call it mechanical shaping instead of luring. I don't like the whole word like luring, because mechanically I am getting the dog to do those things. Mechanical luring and that and building behavior in that aspect, like in my opinion, it takes a little bit longer. And I can already hear people. It's like, well, you're showing the dog with your hands. It shouldn't take longer. Maybe you're a horrible trainer. I don't know. Maybe I am. But I'll tell you right now, when I've free shaped dogs and let them build their own behavior, once they get it, it's quick because they've now understood the answer, and it's like bang, 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 smashing the button because they've built it. But when I show them and I'm like, okay, this is how we're going to do it down. And I put their face to the ground with the food, and then I brush along their back and add tactile pressure to the butt. Like, I'm showing you how to go into a down. Once they get it, but it's not their idea. And sometimes it stops being fun, you know? And at the end of the day, a lot of people forget that training with your dog should be fun.
Yeah.
Training with your dog should be a conversation between you both, in a moment between you both.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that moment, the dog is trusting you to tell it when it's right, tell it when it's wrong, help it get to where it needs to go if it's confused. And you're trusting the dog to do it and not make you look like an idiot.
Well, and I mean,
So
to your point, to piggyback off that, is I look at it as free shaping is it's their own idea. They start learning like, okay, I had this thought, me going to that place got me paid. Whereas if you're luring, you can lure a dog onto the place board as well. They're still trying to translate, well, what got me paid? Was it him pulling me on the leash? Was it me going with him? Was it when I stopped? Like it just adds a little bit more gray area to where the dog will eventually figure it out.
yeah,
But it goes back to what I was saying at the start of all this, to where like if you have the ability to free shape it and your timing is correct on the mark and pay, it's like you eliminate some of the reps that it takes for some dogs to translate what it is that you're trying to communicate to them.
yeah, and that's an important aspect too. Is like your timing, however you're shaping, and with your markers when you're building them and installing them, your timing is important, right? And I think we kind of touched on it earlier with the whole gunshot reference. Your timing with your markers in shaping, whether it's free shaping, mechanical luring, whatever it is, your timing needs to be important. I forgot where I was going with that, but while it's hot on my brain, I want to talk about this. Are you familiar with Robert Sapolsky?
I mean, I've heard of them, but not
Yeah.
familiar with them. Yeah.
So I don't remember all of his titles or anything like that. Basically, the dude's a scientist. He's a doctor. He's far more educated than I am. But he was doing an experiment with, I believe it was apes, where he was measuring levels of dopamine when, you know, reward events came versus work, right? And they found that, as the apes were, doing this act, I believe it was pulling some levers and then food would fall or something like that, or, be given a reward. They found that dopamine was exponentially higher at work, right, during the pulling of the lever than it was when reward came. When reward came, dopamine actually plummeted, sometimes by almost 50%. Because
So
it's kind of like us when we go ahead.
it was the anticipation. I worked to do
Yeah.
this. I'm gonna get it eventually.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's the struggle, right? The struggle of learning. And it's kind of like us when you go on vacation and you're all pumped, like you're planning, you're packing your stuff, and like if you're us, you're like packing a whole kitchen because you got two kids. Um, but it's all this build up and all this anticipation, and then you get to your vacation spot and you're like, now what?
Yeah. You've
Right?
built it up so
You
much in your head that it's like it's not
Yes,
even gonna live up to expectations now.
yes, and then you just start thinking about getting home,
Yeah.
right? So when you think about free shaping with a dog, it's incredibly similar, right? I can show the dog through lures and I can get them through everything. Do they really understand what they're doing, or are they just following my lure? Is the dopamine there? Is the heart there? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And if you're doing it that way, it may get there. I don't know. I don't know your dog. But I have found that when you free shape behavior, that anticipation and the struggle of working and having this innate desire to gain reward through work makes behavior incredibly strong. And like, I just wanted to get that out because if I forgot that, like, I was going to be real mad at myself.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and I mean, it's I don't like doing this very often, but to just try and make this relatable to other people. I don't like attributing, I don't like anthropomorphizing anything, but there are some commonalities here to where if when we talk about fulfillment, which is kind of ultimately what we're talking about in this example, we're the same way in this regard to where we might think we would like to sit on our butts and sit on the couch and just get a check in the mail and not have to do anything for it. And yeah, there's going to be some sort of like, all right, I got paid and I didn't have to do anything for it. But eventually that's going to get old. And you're going to be like,
oh
okay,
yeah,
I want to earn my paycheck. Like I want to do something that resulted in this payment. It is exponentially more fulfilling for us intrinsically. And so that's, I think, is going to be the same concept for the dogs as well in this instance.
yeah,
Is they're just going to appreciate that reward more by working for it than just giving it to it, you know, because at some point, if you just give a dog a bunch of food or a kibble or a ball, they start becoming satiated. They don't really care about it. It loses its value the more you do it, right? And so
exactly.
you know you make them earn it, earn their food. We talk about that all the time. Don't you know? It's much more. At least it's going to be more impactful in how they remember and go about the behavior in the future, right? It's like they're going to think back
Yeah,
like, oh, last time I had to like, you know, guess, oh, he wants me on the place board. You know, instead of you, well, last time dad drug me onto the place board or put me on the place board and paid me. So that becomes part of the sequence. If you pick up your dog and put him on the place board and paid him, they might start waiting on you. Like you're supposed to pick me up now and put me on the place board.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
And there's that gray area to where the dog eventually has to start figuring it out. And they will eventually, but if you can free shape it without you picking up and placing them on it, you don't have that translation period for them to try and figure it out.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that when you're luring dogs and when you're building behavior through mechanical lures, at some point those lures have to go away. We have to start fading the help out. And at least in you know the only realm I know, like sport dogs, right? There's trial day, right? Trial day is when they get on the trial field, they got no equipment on and they're doing the job. So there's no help whatsoever. A lure is help. That's us showing the dog, right? At some point when you're trying to get behavior to where you want it to be, which is you not having to do anything at all and you just give the dog the job and the dog does, that lure has to go away. And if you don't remember to start fading that lure out, and if you don't remember to start putting that reward and that help even on a varied schedule and doing those things, your dog is going to become dependent on it. Like you said with the whole like, picking the dog up, um, your dog can quickly, even younger dogs can quickly become dependent on a lure. It's like, well, you're not showing me, I don't know how to do it, right? And not to beat the horse any more than it is, but again, that's why free shaping is just so powerful because you're not doing anything. The dog is building it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of another example in the gun dog world, and this might be a poor example, but I'm going to take a shot at it anyway. So you can tell me if it's not really a good one or maybe not the best one. But you know, picture a lot of people when they're teaching their dog to look downrange and pick a target and take a line, right? They rely on a white bucket of some sort, you know, posted way down there. Technically, that's a lure getting them to focus in on that bucket. eventually you have to take that bucket away for them to actually
Yeah.
do the behavior of going. But a lot of people do have issues with getting their dog to start taking that line without the visual aid of that white bucket at the end of the line, right? So
Hmm.
and then you have to go back and you still have to show them and build it up. They can become dependent on that lure, and then you're going to have a natural gap of once you take that away. And some dogs, they figure it out, that they come through it just fine. Other dogs, you're banging your head against the wall, but you can't really get too frustrated because it's like, I've done 100 reps with a white bucket on a stick at the end of this line. All of a sudden I remove it. It's like, yeah, the dog is confused now because every single time he's been taught with that white bucket, now all of a sudden the white bucket's just gone.
It's interesting that you bring up this example. When I was in my gold course learning, the final certification for Nipopo, there was a guy, I forget his name, but he did retrievers. He worked duck dogs and stuff like that. And he brought this white bucket out there one day and he's doing this. And we're talking about charging stem, right? To send the dog out the distance. And we were actually in that moment fading the bucket you know, out of this behavior for the dog. The bucket was going away. But we were using the e-collar as a preceding marker to a go marker. It just means keep running until this e-collar cuts off. And I don't know if that's how anybody does it out in the gun dog world, but
Oh yeah, they do.
yeah. And that's it really just kind of lends a hand to like the e-collar being the marker, like a nonverbal marker. The dog is always paying attention. It can't turn its nerves off. So dog feels e-collar. E-collar means go until I don't feel it, right? And in that moment, we started with the bucket. We start with a known stimulus that the dog understands. And then the bucket starts going away. And then e-collars on to bucket. Bucket starts going away. E-collars on, mass reward, bring bucket back. And we're kind of we're playing this flip-flop game. But I think it was like 10 minutes. We got this dog going, I don't know, maybe 200 meters with no bucket out there, like pretty much pushing to pile. Um, and it was really outstanding for me at that time because I'd never seen that done. Didn't understand the concept of white bucket and why it needs to be white, which I still don't really understand why it needs to be white. Like, okay, well,
it stands out better. I mean, like
yeah,
up,
yeah, yeah,
especially if you got like a big row of trees or whatnot back behind you. Now, it doesn't
yeah,
work great if the bucket's like the backdrop is the sky and there's a bunch of clouds. But
yeah,
you got to think at the dog's level, if it's looking down range and you got a bunch of
yeah,
trees back there, that white bucket, 2 or 3 feet off the ground on a stake is going to stand out and
yeah,
give a dog a nice clear target to hone in on. But yeah,
yeah,
that's the only reason for the white bucket.
yeah. Because I think somebody brought in like an orange one or something like that, or like a
Oh
purple
no.
one.
Yeah.
But they bring this bucket out to him, and he goes, "No, idiot, not that one," like or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But he's like, "I need a white bucket." And they're like,
Yeah.
"Well, like, why does it got to be white, man?"
The
And like,
contrast, the orange is going to blend
yeah.
in, and same thing with the
And
purple.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like a full 8 years of handling dogs at that point. Like first time I learned that. Like,
But that's important to note because every world, while
yeah,
dog training is dog training, if you haven't really trained a dog to have to look down range and pick up, if you've never done that, then that's why it's important for everybody to
exactly.
stop getting in your individual camps. If you're a gun dog guy, don't be afraid to enter the working dog space, vice versa, and don't be afraid to go to some of the pet dog people. I mean, take that with a grain of salt. There's some crazy approaches out there with all that.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah. Pet people are nuts, man. I'll
uh,
tell you right now.
I want to get into, let's talk about more applying the marker because the timing of
Yeah,
all this matters. We have the different types of markers, but even applying it at the right time based on the behavior that your dog's doing. Like I said, there's a couple different scenarios. So I'll kind of let you pick an example to kind of go through, but I would like to kind of distinguish between the mark and release, mark and stay in behavior, and then the mark and keep going because each one has its own little unique special use that we can draw very clear distinctions and correlations in the gun dog world.
Yeah, absolutely. So the example that I'm going to give is going to cover a few different markers, right? So at least some of the ones that I use, right? So part of what I taught Sim for tactical reasons was to be in a heel next to me, and then I can send him out via laser to a position, right, where he um, goes to, gets on, turns around, does whatever, pretty much a place, right? So I can send him to place and then have him remain there and wait for my next command, right? So in that moment, the markers that I'm giving him are literally the word mark, which when I shine my laser down, mark means look at the ground. And through classical conditioning, we build that. And I trace the laser out and then I tell him place. He follows until that laser cuts off. And then he goes and gets on whatever. Right. So now I already have my marker for sending the dog away. Right. Then I have my stay in behavior marker where he's on his place and I need him to stay there. I need him to remain there. Because if you've ever met my dog, he doesn't stay in one place for very long. Um, so as I'm walking in or as I'm moving about, I'm telling him, good, right? Keep doing what you're doing, right? And through classical conditioning, at some point, reward has to come either at me or away from me, right? So I'm walking around and I'm telling him good, or I'm walking in to reward him. And incrementally, every few steps or so, good, good. And then I get to him and I tell him, yes, right? Yes means it's coming from me. I'm going to give it to you, right? So a direct reward. Now, the second half of that, like, I'm not going to walk in and reward him every time. I need him to understand that he can release from that behavior, come out of behavior, and then receive reward at me, right? Or come to me and then terminate the behavior chain, right? Which is important there, and I'll tell you why here in a second. So in training, I'll send him to place, good. I'll walk in, walk out, good, and we can build duration off of that marker. But then when I want to release him to break from behavior to come receive reward, I tell him okay. So very different distinguishable markers to the dog. And essentially, like, I can't put it any simpler. The marker is something that is something clear that precedes a notable event, right? Yes means it's coming from dad. Okay means come get it, right? And in in an operational sense, I'm never going to reward my dog when I'm out in the Badlands doing whatever. Um, I'm just going to terminate that behavior. So if I have to send him out and then I have to pull him back or whatever, like, yeah, you did the right thing. Good job. Done. We got to go over here. But his reward is on a varied schedule. And I think I kind of talked about this. You got to get on a varied schedule with your reward and your markers for him to not trust the damn marker. He has to trust that reward is like coming at some point, right? Done. Okay, well, damn, every time dad said done, at some point the reward came after that. I'll try harder next time, right? So that's all really important is like you got to get on a varied schedule. The dog has to have a hope of reward, and the hope of reward has to outweigh the struggle of behavior, right? So kind of going through, application of those markers. I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, it's again, I'm trying to translate this into the gun dog world, but essentially, this is why I said earlier, you can't really have the discussion on markers without reward, and that doesn't always mean
Exactly.
treats, right?
No.
But to build the marker, the reason why markers have value is because of consequences. It can be good consequences like a reward, kibble, ball, whatever, but also you have the negative marker consequences. Corrections have consequences, whether that's the e-collar, what have you. Negative
Yeah.
punishment, taking the game away, putting them back up in the kennel. There's a bunch of different ways that you can punish behaviors, but either way, the reason why these markers have value is because it precedes an event, right? And like you
Yeah.
said, There's a million ways you can skin this, and the place board. This is why I love it, because it's directly applicable to what we do in the gun dog world as well. Is it's one thing to get a dog to go up on the board. Where a lot of people struggle is their dog starts to learn that the reward is by me getting up on the place board. Therefore, they leave it to get back up on it. Leave it to get back up on it. They just keep trying to pull the slot machine lever, right?
Yeah.
So you have to build that duration, and that's where the duration marker, the good, it's just like, yes,
Yeah.
that's what I want, but we're not quite there yet. And then you just slowly build up to it, and then you can mark. In your example, you're saying yes, and you're paying them on the place board, or you're giving them
Yep.
the okay, which is permission to leave the place board and come get paid by me.
Yeah, which in that sense, like, if you want to talk about like release terminal, whatever the verbiage is, that okay is that terminal marker, right? I can lay over markers, and this is going to start sounding like damn computer science, but when I tell him okay while he's on the place board, that's his terminal marker. Okay, behavior is now done. Come receive your reward, right? Simultaneously, if I mark okay, I don't reward him, and then I tell him done, right? Okay, now I've terminated this entire behavior chain because we're going to go start doing something else that may be 100 yards away, right? You can have redundancy. You can do whatever you want as long as it works for the dog in front of you. But yes, when you're talking about markers, you can't not talk about reward. You can't not talk about other things that need to be kind of up to snuff in order for your marker system to work well.